Have you ever wondered how some of Hollywood's most famous movies, these absolute classics, ended up being, well, free for everyone? Today, we're diving into the wild stories, the crazy accidents, and the forgotten paperwork that turned million-dollar films into accidental gifts for all of us.
So, what do a Christmas angel, a Western legend, and a flesh-eating zombie have in common? It sounds like the beginning of a really weird joke, right? But the answer is actually pretty simple. They're all icons of the public domain. And their stories tell you everything you need to know about the strange and, frankly, sometimes clumsy history of film copyright.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to break down what public domain actually means. Then, we'll get into the good stuff, the paperwork fails and the ownership nightmares that created these cinematic freebies. We'll run through a roster of absolute Hollywood icons whose work is now yours to enjoy. And finally, we'll talk about why this all still matters so much today. Okay, let's start at the beginning. What in the world is the public domain, and how does a movie become an accidental gift?
It's actually pretty straightforward. These films have basically become cultural property. They belong to everyone. That means you can watch them, you can download them, you can re-edit them, you can even use clips in your own projects, all without paying a dime or asking for permission. They're ours.
You know, nowadays, studios have armies of lawyers guarding every single frame of their movies. But back then, things were a lot looser. A simple typo, a forgotten renewal form, that's literally all it took to lose control of a multi-million-dollar movie. Forever.
All right, let's get into our first category, the paperwork fails. And trust me, you are going to be amazed at how tiny, almost comical errors had these massive, massive consequences. This one's a classic. George A. Romero's absolute masterpiece, the film that created the modern zombie, was originally called Night of the Flesh Eaters. Well, there was a last-minute title change, the distributor rushed to get new prints made, and in that rush, they forgot one tiny little thing, the copyright notice. And poof, just like that, the zombie apocalypse was unleashed on the world completely for free.
And sometimes the mistake was just breathtakingly simple. Take a look at this. For the amazing Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn thriller Charade, they had everything right, except for the word copyright or that little C symbol. That one tiny omission, that's it. And a huge Hollywood movie immediately fell into the public domain the second it was released. It's just unbelievable.
But here's the kicker. Sometimes it wasn't even a mistake. For a guy like legendary producer Roger Corman, who famously shot the original Little Shop of Horrors in just 2 days, copyright was just an afterthought. He was all about the quick box office return, and he just didn't bother filing the paperwork. He had no idea it was going to become this huge cult classic, a Broadway musical, and a blockbuster remake. Oops.
Okay, so that's paperwork. But what happens when the ownership itself just becomes a total confusing mess? Well, that's another way these films ended up as free agents.
Just look at the journey for the 1937 classic, A Star is Born. The rights were sold, and then sold again, and again, and again, and with every single sale, the job of renewing the copyright was passed along like a hot potato until, you guessed it, somebody dropped it. Everybody just assumed someone else had taken care of it.
And of course, we have to talk about the big one, the most famous public domain story of all time. You know, It's a Wonderful Life wasn't a massive hit when it first came out. It only became the Christmas classic we all know and love because its copyright lapsed. And for decades, any TV station in America could air it for free. And boy, did they ever. But this story has a really clever twist. So after the film became this huge cultural touchstone because it was free, the studio found a legal backdoor. In 1993, they managed to secure the rights to the original short story the movie was based on and the musical score. So, get this. While the film itself is still technically in the public domain, you can't legally show it without licensing those other two things. It was a brilliant move that slammed the door on its time as a TV free-for-all.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the absolute legends of the silver screen, whose iconic work is now available for all of us, all thanks to these copyright quirks.
First up, you gotta start with a true giant of cinema, Charlie Chaplin. The Little Tramp himself is actually a really fascinating case when it comes to copyright. His masterpiece, The Gold Rush, is the perfect example. The original silent version from 1925? That's in the public domain. But years later, Chaplin re-released it with his own narration and a brand new score, and that version is still protected. Pretty clever way to breathe new life and new copyright protection into an old classic.
Next up, the master of the deadpan stare and some of the most incredible stunts you'll ever see, the great stone face himself, Buster Keaton.
Now, unlike Chaplin's slightly more complicated case, a ton of Keaton's absolute best films are fully in the public domain. We're talking about the breathtakingly ambitious The General, Sherlock Jr. These movies are pillars of silent comedy, and they're completely free for a whole new generation to discover.
And for our last icon, we're heading out to the American West with the man who pretty much defined the movie cowboy for, well, ever, John Wayne.
Yeah, I know, it might be a little surprising to see the Duke on this list, but it's true. Several of his movies are in the public domain, and we're not just talking about some of his early B-westerns. We're talking about a huge late-career hit, the sprawling comedy McLintock, which his own production company just let the copyright lapse on.
So, we've seen how this stuff happens and who it happened to. But what's the real-world impact of all this? I mean, why should we care about some clerical error from 50 or 60 years ago? I want you to look at this number. Over 3,000. What could that possibly be? Well, it's connected to one of the most incredible stories of film preservation out there, a story that would have been totally impossible without the public domain. It involves two of comedy's greatest stars and a truly epic mess. That number? It's the estimated number of pies used in what many call the greatest pie fight in movie history, from the Laurel and Hardy film The Battle of the Century. For decades, this film was mostly lost. But because it was in the public domain, archivists and fans from all over the world could freely share, combine, and restore any rediscovered pieces without worrying about legal problems. The public domain literally saved this piece of comedy history.
And that really brings us to our final thought. These accidental gifts, they're not just about getting free movies. They're about preserving our shared cultural history. So if a film with 3,000 pies in it could be rescued from being lost forever, it just makes you wonder. What other forgotten treasures are still out there, just waiting to be rediscovered, all thanks to a forgotten signature or a misplaced piece of paper?